Our next speaker, Dr. James Billington, is only the 13th person to hold the position of Librarian of Congress, one he has occupied for over 20 years. Prior to that time, he served as director of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. A distinguished author and authority on Russian history, Dr. Billington is the founder of the Open World program, which has brought over 10,000 emerging young Russian political leaders to communities throughout America. Dr. Billington.
Thank you very much. It is really a very great honor and privilege to be able to speak of the extraordinary public service of someone who is not only an exemplary public servant and the man who put human rights at the center not only of the international agenda but of the sense of world responsibilities of leaders and of peoples everywhere. It's easy to forget that when the Helsinki Agreements were first promulgated, that there was a widespread feeling, certainly among the rulers of the Soviet Union, and it was shared widely elsewhere, that somehow this was all about fixing the borders rather than fundamentally changing the societies. And yet, a number of people in this room shared with Max, but Max played a very special role in assuring that the provisions that talked about human rights were the defining and turned out to be the historically important part of those agreements. Because borders are not immutable, are not fixed, are not impenetrable when you're dealing with the hearts and minds of people. That's a phrase that's often used, but it's truer, I think, than soft power, which is sometimes used. The reality is very great, but it disguises the fact that the most powerful thing in human life and in fundamental change in human history, as distinguished from incremental modifications, are carried by ideas and ideals that can be effectively communicated. And in Max Kampelman, we had somebody who not simply advocated these and did it very skillfully, but embodied them. And when you're dealing with hostile societies that are unique, that are inherently suspicious of the spoken word, it's the bearer of the message as much as the content of the message that penetrates people. And for those long years in Madrid, when the assumption was still very widespread that whatever the merits of the case, that the Bolsheviks, as they used to be called, the communists, they may not have a very good case, but they stayed longer. And the others would get tired and want to go home and watch the Late Show or have a drink or do something. Well, Max outlasted everybody. And at the same time, he did something really, he embodied an extraordinary combination of skills, because the way often was in the sort of declining Soviet system, which is losing its legitimacy, was to be rhetorically tough, but whenever you met them in person, to be rather weak and semi-apologetic for what you said in public. Max was just the opposite. He was invariably polite. It really attracted the friendship of people, even as he was out arguing them. It's a very rare combination, but I can tell you with this program that we brought thousands of young Russian leaders. His name comes up very often as someone who was extraordinarily well spoken of by the people whom he was quietly but politely defeating in argument on the public arena. That's an enormous tribute. And that means that you have people, a group like this, many of whom were part of that same long struggle, gathered here. But beyond that, you have many, many other places around the world that you'll never be able to count or maybe even hear from, for whom this persistence through 2 administrations, through a variety of Congresses, with a variety of interlocutors, I'm not even to mention his work on arms control issues, which were so important as well. But this singular accomplishment is something that history, if it's well written, will record, and Max Kampelman will emerge as a figure much larger than life. But let me say something about life itself, because while he was at Madrid, he was also chairman of the board of the still relatively young Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, which I was then privileged to be the director. While he was doing what he did in Madrid, this quiet, largely unnoticed then, but powerful movement of a seemingly immovable stalemate with the Russians, who always played chess, but figured that they would always end in a draw. Well, he reversed that. He came back to every meeting of the board of the Wilson Center, flying back, this tired man who outlasted the communists in this long discussions and debates, and was constantly directed, interested in the kind of thinking that was going on, the kind of what we needed to have. I can mention two conferences that occurred while he was chairman that were really important. A very large conference with a large number of congressional participations on the future of Russia, in which, unlike most conferences at that time, it was not assumed that that system was immutable. It was assumed that we had to do serious thinking about it. And then another conference in late '82 or early '83 on Poland, at a time when the future of solidarity and the unique role it played seemed like it too was just a sad final protest against an immutable system. And we could not have held those, I think, without the invisible, powerful, non-directive but always supportive leadership of Max Kampelman in that institution, even while he was doing the frontline work. Remember, it was initially the neutral countries, it was the Helsinki agreements, after all, in Finland, which many people thought was hopelessly neutral. I happen to lived a year there, and I had a very more positive opinion of the Finns. But the Finns and the Swiss and the Austrians, who were neutral technically in the Cold War, were the earliest ones to champion it. But bringing all of our traditional allies in, as well as following up on that lead, would have been enough to have been an accomplishment for any one man. But then and since, he has gone on as a kind of pedagogue-in-chief of our imaginative thinking about the possibilities not just of diplomacy, but of the future of freedom in the world, and the fact that freedom without human rights is an empty word, and that freedom and human rights are not simply the possession of a small few who have always enjoyed it, but are the hope and aspiration, and in the long run, not the soft power, but the real power behind the American dream. So, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of everyone in this room, many of whom have participated with Max in these struggles, both intellectually and conceptually, diplomatically, and at sacrifice of their own time, energy, and idealism, but also on behalf of all the others to whom human rights today means so much, we all owe you, Max, an eternal and very grateful thanks.